several thousand different food chemicals used in our food supply, and while it would take a pretty long time to discuss all of them, in this video I'm going to focus on the worst 6. And I've done my best to really just come up with a list of common food chemicals. And what you'll see once we start looking at some of these different foods is how many different products contain these harmful chemicals. So I hope that this video helps to empower you to avoid these harmful chemicals and give you a little bit more understanding as to why these certain chemicals are so dangerous in the first place. One of the most dangerous food chemicals is aspartame. This is an artificial sweetener that was actually somewhat discovered by accident. So they were trying to come up with an anti-ulcer medication, and they ended up just kind of discovering that it also was incredibly sweet. So after this anti-ulcer medication was repeatedly rejected by the FDA, they eventually were successful in having aspartame approved for use as a sweetener. Aspartame is single-handedly responsible for 75% of the adverse food reactions reported to the FDA. This means that of all of the different adverse reactions that people report to FDA.gov, aspartame is responsible for 3/4 of them. So now we actually are seeing less aspartame on the food label, but instead you might see sucralose or acesulfame potassium. So these artificial sweeteners have been found in a multitude of studies, not only to cause more sugar cravings, cause more carbohydrate cravings, but they're actually known to also prevent the fat burning process in the body, actually making the body more likely to cling on to all of that stubborn weight we want to lose. So not only do artificial sweeteners have a number of adverse effects, things like headaches, indigestion, rashes, but they're also not going to help you lose weight, get healthy, or do any of the things that these artificial sweeteners are claiming to do. So aspartame is one of the biggies that I personally try to avoid and that I would recommend for others to avoid. So you're primarily going to find artificial sweeteners in your diet beverages, sugar-free beverages, things like Slim Fast. But you'll also start finding, if you start looking at food labels, that there are more and more products that contain artificial sweeteners. It's not just those diet and sugar-free foods. So I actually use this app in my phone called EatWhat. And it is a directory of all of these different food additives. And then you can also use it to scan a food label. So if you are someone who doesn't like reading food labels, or maybe you just don't have time, you can actually hold up a food and scan it with your phone, and it's going to tell you which of the dangerous or toxic ingredients it contains. You can also sign up for different diets. So there's one for blood sugar or heart disease. There's tons of different diets. And then it'll actually tell you if that food is allowed in your diet or not. So if you were on a gluten-free diet, for instance, you could scan a food label and it would tell you if that food contains gluten. So this is really handy for something like these artificial sweeteners, where suddenly it's not enough just to avoid the diet foods and sugar-free foods anymore. So having something like this, you can easily determine whether or not a food contains that toxic ingredient, comes in really handy. So looking at the aspartame entry in the app, it actually has this description. And then it talks about some of the various adverse effects that people get, like headaches, migraines, dizziness, attacks of epilepsy, nausea, numbness, tachycardia, which is twitching, weight gain, rashes, depression, fatigue, irritability. I won't read them all because there's a lot of them. But you can see where this would come in really, really handy because there's so many different food chemicals now, it can be really hard to keep track. So I want to thank EatWhat for sponsoring this video and giving me the opportunity to tell you about some of these toxic chemicals. Let's go ahead and move on to the second one. This one is artificial colors like red 40 and yellow number 5. One thing that most people don't realize about artificial colors is that most of them are actually made from coal tar. That means that these are petroleum products, okay? And in my opinion, things that are made from petroleum are not things that I want in my diet. If that isn't reason enough, we could talk about some of the adverse effects commonly associated with some of these artificial colors. So red 40, we would find red 40 in the bright red Powerade. It's also in the Kool-Aid, marketed to kids. It's also in the Pop Rocks, marketed to kids. It's also in the Fruit Loops, typically marketed to kids, although there's plenty of adults that eat Fruit Loops too. No problem, no shame. So red 40, if we were to look inside the EatWhat app, may cause allergies, may intensify asthma symptoms. When combined with benzoates, which is a really common preservative we're going to talk about in a minute, it's known to cause hyperactivity in children. It's believed that carcinogenic products may be produced when it's decomposed. If we look at yellow number 5, that would be a whole other discussion. But the bottom line here is that these artificial colors, number 1, come from something which, in my opinion, is not edible in the first place. And number 2, are so pervasive. Did I mention the Cheetos? Let's see, we've got yellow number 6 is our artificial color in the Cheetos. But the bottom line is that pretty much all of your processed foods are going to contain artificial colors of some kind. There's also one known as titanium dioxide, and it's even found in this coffee creamer. So titanium dioxide is often used to make things look whiter. Titanium dioxide is a chemical that's actually been banned in certain countries. So again, that's something that is really handy about this little app. So our next harmful food chemical is MSG, or monosodium glutamate. Now, one of the most notable things about MSG is that it's used to create obesity and diabetes in laboratory animals so that they can do various testing on them for diabetes drugs or obesity studies. So not only do I kind of disapprove of animal studies in the first place, but this one really borders on absolute cruelty, because now they are purposefully giving diabetes to these rats, purposefully making them obese. And what do they use to do it, guys, but MSG? So what do we think it's going to have in terms of effects on us when we eat it? It's going to combat obesity. It's going to combat diabetes. No, it's quite the opposite. So you will see MSG on a lot of food labels, for instance, these Cheetos here. But you also need to be aware that MSG has a lot of pseudonyms. So when you see yeast extract, textured vegetable protein, autolyzed yeast extract, or sodium caseinate, these are all other names for MSG. Now, it's important to kind of differentiate that MSG is technically a naturally occurring substance found in things like meats and cheeses. But what makes the natural present MSG so different from the monosodium glutamate that is added to foods is that when it's present in its natural amounts, the way that it normally comes in a food, it's in a form and an amount that the body is able to break down and use. And while it still gives that pleasurable effect, it's not going to have those adverse reactions associated with basically consuming extremely high doses of isolated glutamic acid. Now, your barbecue flavored foods, your meat flavored foods, so anything that is a processed food that is made to taste like meat, and even if it does contain meat, just know that they often are adding MSG to those types of foods to kind of accentuate that flavor. So now let's move on to the next ingredient. Partially hydrogenated oils, or trans fats. Partial hydrogenation is a process done to liquid oils to help them be more solid. So things like margarine and Crisco are really great examples of partially hydrogenated oils. Now, trans fats have been found to be the most harmful dietary fat in terms of raising your LDL or bad cholesterol, in terms of increasing your risk of blood clots, metabolic syndrome, heart disease. There are so many different problems associated with these trans fats that the FDA actually started requiring for brands to include the trans fat content on the label. But as you might expect, it's not enough to just trust them to tell you whether or not there are trans fats in the food. If you really want to know, you actually need to check that ingredient label yourself. So just looking at a couple of these foods, any of your fat-free or reduced fat foods are generally going to be a prime spot for partially hydrogenated oils, because now they're looking for ways to substitute that fat, or to make you kind of feel like you're still eating fat when you eat it, but they can't actually put as much fat in there because it's reduced. So partially hydrogenated oils, they are right here on the label. So your, fat-free foods, diet foods like that. We also have partially hydrogenated oils in this coffee creamer. Right? Again, because it needs to kind of have that almost milky-like consistency, right? When you add it to your coffee, corn syrup solids, and then partially hydrogenated soybean oil is actually the second ingredient. Sodium caseinate, one of our MSG pseudonyms, is in there. And that titanium dioxide is also in there. So this little baby alone has 4 or 5 of these dangerous chemicals. And then partially hydrogenated oils are also going to be really common in your processed foods, like your just add water instant meals and things like that. So avoiding partially hydrogenated oils, super important. Mono and diglycerides is another kind of name that you'll see on the label, which you need to associate with trans fats. So mono and diglycerides, that would be an ingredient in the Slim Fast. That would also be an ingredient in a lot of, when we think about fast food type products. There's a video I did a couple years ago on the Big Mac, and I remember that it had that mono and diglycerides in it. And I thought, what could that be? That doesn't sound so bad. And after doing some research, I realized that, that's one you want to avoid too. And it is an increasingly common food chemical. Next up is sodium benzoate. So again, I can pull this up in my little app here, and it's got the little red exclamation point to it, saying that there are some health concerns associated with it. Just reading a little excerpt here from the description, there have been many cases known to cause reactions similar to allergies due to the release of histamine. It has a strongly irritant effect on the stomach mucosa. And then it actually lists the acceptable daily intake. So this kind of touches on an important issue with these different additives, which is that if we were really just getting a teeny tiny amount of them, maybe their harm would be negligible. But when we're in a situation where these ingredients are found in thousands of different foods, suddenly you're not only completely unable to know how much of any of these things you're actually ingesting, but there's also a really good likelihood that you're taking in way more than that recommended dose. So sodium benzoate, this is a product of benzene, which is a known carcinogen. Another thing to consider here with these artificial preservatives is that if they are engineered to preserve the food, what do you think happens when you eat them? Do they get broken down and excreted from the body the way that a food is supposed to? Or do they actually break down and have really negative components? Some of these different food additives, when they break down, they actually create formaldehyde, which is embalming fluid. So just consider that a lot of these different health effects associated with these food chemicals are partially just that they prevent your body from being able to do all of the different functions that it should do. Detoxifying is a big one, right? Because if your body can't get rid of these chemicals and they just sit in your fat cells or sit in various parts of your body having these negative effects, this is a really big problem. So sodium benzoate is a really harmful preservative, and again, a really, really increasingly common one. So if you were to actually use your little ingredient scanner, you would start seeing that things like sodium benzoate are in almost every processed food in the grocery store. Last but certainly not least is butylated hydroxyanisole, also known as BHA. There is another very similar chemical known as butylated hydroxytoluene, or BHT. Both of these are synthetic antioxidants. They're typically used as preservatives. So what's really funny is that when you see them on the food label, it actually says BHA for freshness, or BHT for freshness. You'll see it on your chewing gum, see it in your candies. You'll start seeing it everywhere if you look. So just looking here briefly at the description in EatWhat, a synthetic antioxidant used in fats intended for human consumption to prevent them from going rancid. This is let's see, together with vitamin C, it may produce free radicals that damage components as well as the DNA. This is a reason why BHA usage has been reduced in the EU. After application of BHA to laboratory pets, duodenal ulcers were detected. Consumption in large amounts can result in liver dysfunction. So that one again has the big red exclamation point telling you that it's a dangerous food additive. A lot of these different preservatives, additives, emulsifiers, there's a lot of different usages that these different ingredients have. But the bottom line is that nothing nutritive is given to us by these food chemicals, which means that they're not giving you vitamins, they're not giving you minerals or enzymes or antioxidants. Okay, so they're not giving you nutrition. That's why a lot of times the artificial sweeteners, they'll say non-nutritive sweetener. It's like a little red flag there, right? If there's no nutrition in it, why would I eat it? What's the point? So these food additives are added to make the food more enjoyable to eat, to make you feel more addicted to the foods, things like MSG, for instance. But what we really want to focus on in terms of protecting our health is that we're just eating things for nutrition. And generally, those are going to be your minimally processed foods with a pretty short ingredient list. Minimally, if you can keep an eye peeled for these 6 really toxic chemicals I discussed, that's going to really help improve your health and improve your diet. What you'll start finding is that these ingredients are in a lot of processed foods. And the take-home message for me after years of reading ingredient labels has just been to try and avoid processed foods altogether. So I want to thank EatWhat for sponsoring this video and for actually teaching me a lot about some food chemicals that I didn't know. I really hope that this information has been helpful to you. I look forward to hearing your questions, your comments, or topic requests for future videos down in the section below. If you want to learn more about me and my health coaching practice, you can visit me at CorrinaRachel.com. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next video.